The storm was eating the mountain alive, and I was losing the strength to move. I dragged Mark through the snow until that crooked cabin appeared out of nowhere. One broken door, one dying lighter, one tiny flame between us and the dark. I told myself if we survived this night, the mountain would have to deal with us in the morning. Dawn didn't arrive with color. It pushed its way through layers of gray mist, slow and weak. The wind wasn't howling like the night before, but every gust still carried sharp crystals of snow that cut across my face. I stood at the cabin door, exhausted, my gloved hands soaked and stiff with ice. Behind me, on the floor, Mark lay wrapped in everything I'd managed to find: old blankets, pieces of fabric, my own jacket. His face looked peaceful, but his breathing was faint and uneven. I knelt down and touched his cheek, just to feel if there was any warmth left. There was. Barely. "I'll be right back," I murmured. "I'll find something. Anything." I shoved my backpack onto my shoulders and stepped into the white emptiness. In front of me, nothing. No trail. No trees. Just rolling hills dissolving into the sky. The GPS on my watch flickered, the signal dropping in and out before finally giving up. No connection. So I used the only thing I had left: memory. The direction of the wind, the slope of the terrain, the vague idea of where we had fallen. Through the fog, something dark flashed for a second, maybe a rock, maybe an old fence. I pushed toward it, legs heavy, chest burning from the cold. An old wooden fence. On it, a strip of torn plastic, bleached by sun and time. Beneath the ice sheathing the wood, I spotted a faded sign. The letters were barely visible, but I recognized one word: ridge. "So we're not that far," I whispered, mostly to keep myself from panicking. When I turned back, the wind picked up again and threw snow into a spiral. My own tracks disappeared in seconds. The realization hit hard: I could lose the way back. One wrong turn and I would vanish into this white void for good. I searched the horizon for the shape of the cabin, but all I saw was white. My chest tightened. "Mark!" I screamed. "Can you hear me?" No answer. Just the echo of my own voice, swallowed by the blanket of snow. I stood there, alone, while the snow settled on my eyelashes and weighed down my hood. And in that moment, I understood something simple and brutal: if I didn't find my way back right now, there would be nothing left to find. The door slammed against the wall as I stumbled back into the cabin, frozen to the bone. Snow slid from my sleeves, my hood clung wetly to my hair. Behind me, that blade of icy air cut into the room and stole the little warmth I'd managed to build the night before. Mark was still on the floor, almost motionless. His breathing came in broken, uneven fragments, his lips pale and dry. I dropped to my knees beside him and pressed my ear to his chest. A heartbeat. Slow, but present. "You're here. You're still here," I whispered, like a prayer I didn't believe in. I looked around the cabin. The walls were cracked, the windows coated in frost. Old wood and scraps of paper were scattered across the floor. On the table, a rusted can and a broken cup. In one corner, a fireplace. Old, half-collapsed, but still our only chance. I gathered broken boards and torn newspaper, stuffing them into the fireplace with shaking hands. First attempt to light it, nothing. Second, a short flicker that died immediately. Third, smoke filled the room, making my eyes sting in water. I coughed, waved the fumes away, but I didn't stop. After a few long seconds, a tiny flame finally caught. I cupped my hands around it, fed it slowly, watched as it began to breathe on its own. I held my hands above it, trembling, watching it try to grow. Mark shifted slightly and whispered, voice rough and distant. How far are we? I don't know, I admitted quietly. But we have fire now. That's a start. I looked up at the window. The weak daylight was already fading. Snow was starting again. Far away, something held, sharp and lonely. I pulled the blanket higher around Mark, tucked it tight under his shoulders, then sank down beside the fireplace, resting my head on my knees. The fire crackled softly. But beneath that small, fragile sound, I could already hear another one, the deep, steady growl of the wind returning with a new storm. The fire had been burning for hours, but it barely warmed Mark's hands. I sat next to him, wrapped in an old blanket, watching his chest rise and fall in small, stubborn movements. Sometimes he looked like he was about to drift away for good. Then suddenly he'd gasp and pull another breath back from the edge. "Don't do that to me," I whispered. "Not yet." I dug through the backpack and laid out the little I had, a half-empty bottle of water, one bandage, a small knife, a few tissues. Then I examined his ankle. The swelling had worsened, the skin around it turning an ugly shade of blue. When I tried to move it even slightly, he groaned in pain. Okay. Don't move," I said quickly. I pulled his injured leg closer, wrapped it with a torn piece of fabric and tissues, then tied it off with whatever string I could find. I used a thin stick as a makeshift splint and secured it with bits of rope and torn cloth from my own clothes. He opened his eyes, hazy and unfocused. "How long was I out?" "Long enough for me to freeze while watching you," I said, trying to sound lighter than I felt. "I have to get this wet jacket off you. It's killing you." He tried to protest, but his voice barely came out. I undressed him piece by piece, hands shaking, feeling how cold his skin was. Then I put my own dry layers on him, leaving myself in just a thin shirt. Outside, the snow kept falling. Somewhere in the distance, a long, low howl cut through the air. I flinched, but forced myself to stay calm. I sat down beside him again, checked his wrist for a pulse, and whispered, "You know, Mark. This isn't the first time winter tried to kill me. But this time I'm not planning on letting it win." He didn't answer, but I saw the slightest movement in the corner of his mouth. Maybe a half-formed smile. Maybe just a twitch. I rested my forehead on his chest and drew in a deep breath. The outside world disappeared. There was only the fire, his breath, and the heavy silence pulsing like a clock with no hands. Night swallowed the mountain whole. The snow refused to stop, and the wind hammered the cabin walls like it wanted to tear them down. I sat by the fireplace, watching the flames burn low, clinging to wet wood that didn't want to catch. I grabbed a chunk of chair leg, slammed it against the floor, and threw the broken pieces into the fire. For a moment, sparks danced, then calmed. The air filled with smoke and the sour smell of burning varnish. Mark's breathing grew softer, and his skin burned under my hand. Fever. Rising fast. No, not now," I whispered. I reached for the last bottle of water, wet a piece of cloth, and placed it on his forehead. Drops ran down his temple and neck. I sat back, tried to think clearly. No meds. No antiseptic. Just desperation and improvised triage. I tore my sleeve and turned it into a new wrap. Every movement was deliberate, but inside I was panicking. His ankle looked worse. The swelling, the color. It all screamed infection and damage I couldn't fix. He opened his eyes again, barely. "Lena. I'm here. I see." Light. In the water. I flinched. Just rest. Don't talk. Save your strength. He tried to say more, but his voice faded. I watched him, eyes burning, refusing to let myself cry. Outside, the wind deepened into a low, constant roar. The entire cabin seemed to breathe with it. The wood creaked, the walls shuddered. I walked to the door, listened, then to the window. Beyond the frost, pure white emptiness. No sky. No ground. Just the same endless colorless void. I came back, sat beside him and said, firmer this time. Listen to me. You're not dying. Not here. Not like this. He didn't move. I leaned forward, pressed my forehead against his and whispered. If we fall together. All the way to the end. Somewhere deep under the snow, something boomed. The wall shook. A distant avalanche? Or just the mountain shifting in its sleep? No answer. Just the breathing of the wind, sounding less and less like weather and more like a living thing. Night came again, but I refused to let my eyes close. I sat at the table with the old radio in front of me, its buttons worn and sticky, the metal cold under my fingers. Around it, wires, batteries, metal scraps I'd scavenged from every corner of the cabin. A candle flickered on the table, its flame twitching with every gust. Mark slept. For the first time in hours, his breathing was steadier. The fever seemed to have dropped, if only a little. That was enough for me to keep working. I had run a wire out through the window, up toward the roof, a makeshift antenna made from forks, bits of aluminum, and copper filaments pulled from broken bulbs. If you ever worked, I muttered to the radio, this is the time. I pressed the receive button. The radio went dead, then hissed, then popped. Silence. Then, a faint, broken static, like someone was trying to speak underwater. Hello? I said quickly. Hello? Can anyone hear me? Mountain ridge. Old cabin. 2 people. Nothing. Just a crackle. Then a sharper burst of static, like something slamming into the same frequency as me. I held my breath, turned the dial slowly. Another pop. Another little flare of noise. Then I heard it, 3 short beeps. Silence. Then again, 3 short beeps. My heart slammed against my ribs. That's a signal, I whispered. That's someone. Or something. I grabbed my notebook, wrote down the time, the approximate frequency, every detail I could. Then I waited. 1 minute. 2. 5. Nothing more. I tried again, but all I got was a dull hiss. I glanced over at Mark. Still sleeping. I went to him, touched his shoulder, and said quietly. Someone heard us, Mark. Someone out there knows we're here. I sat beside him, squeezed his hand, and closed my eyes for a moment. The candle burned lower. A draft slipped into the room and snuffed it out. In the dark, the only sound left was the weak hum of the radio, faint, but alive. Like a heartbeat that refused to stop. I smiled into the darkness and whispered. We're not done yet. Day didn't mean much anymore. It was just a different shade of gray pressing against the windows. Time dissolved into the rhythm of firewood and silence. I sat by the window, watching snow fall in a slow, monotonous pattern, as if the sky had forgotten how to do anything else. The fire in the hearth was barely breathing. A dented pot balanced on the edge, filled with melted snow. It was our only water, floating with tiny black flecks of ash. I didn't even bother fishing them out anymore. Mark barely moved. His lips were cracked, his skin pale as the world outside. I spooned a few drops of lukewarm water into his mouth, supporting his head carefully. "Just swallow," I murmured. "That's all we've got." On the table, I had laid everything out neatly: 2 cans of beans, one cracked open, smelling suspiciously off, and a few hard pieces of stale bread. My eyes skimmed the faded labels. The expiration dates were long gone. I opened one can, sniffed it, and immediately pushed it away. The air filled with the metallic stench of rot. "No," I said out loud. "I'm not risking food poisoning on top of everything else." The room spun for a second. My stomach clenched with hunger, my vision darkened around the edges. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, forced myself not to pass out. I went to the door, opened it, and stepped outside. The air was brutal, but clean. I scooped snow into my hand and ate it, letting the freezing cold run down my throat. It wasn't much, but it was something. Enough to keep me standing. I filled the pot with more snow and brought it back in, setting it over the small flame. Mark mumbled something. I leaned closer. "What did you say?" He whispered, barely audible, "Food." I looked at him and smiled sadly. "Yes," I said softly. "I'll find something. I promise." I knew that promise might be a lie. But saying it out loud was the only way to make it through another day. Night fell again, bringing a new kind of fear that had nothing to do with cold. I sat by the fire, listening to the sounds of the cabin: wood creaking, embers cracking, the occasional long, drawn-out howl of wind slipping through the broken chimney. The fire was small but steady. I had thrown everything I could find into it: pieces of chair, window frames, even a strip from my backpack. I watched the light crawl across the walls, twisting shadows into shapes that felt too familiar. Mark was asleep, his face calm but his breathing uneven. I laid a hand on his forehead. Sweat. The fever was rising again. "Hang on," I whispered. "Just until morning." I walked to the window. Outside, the world was a blank canvas. All I could see was my own reflection in the ice-coated glass: hollow eyes, gray cheeks, cracked lips. For a moment, I didn't recognize myself. I sat back down by the fire and opened my notebook, drawing small circles. One for each day. So far there were only 2. Each one felt like a lifetime. Then I heard it. A sound. Not from the radio, from outside. Not wind. Not falling snow. Something moving. I froze. The scrape came again. Something heavy shifting through the snow, closer than before. Panic flared under my skin. I grabbed the small knife and walked to the door, every step careful, quiet. I pressed my ear against the wood. Silence. I cracked the door open and peered outside. Darkness. Snow. Nothing else. I shut it quickly, leaned my back against it, forcing my breath to slow down. There's no one out there, I told myself. There's no one. I went back to Mark, pulled the blanket higher over him, and sat down. I didn't sleep. By dawn, the fire had died in silence. Ash and weak gray light filled the cabin. I watched the first cold ray push through the cracked window. It wasn't warm, but it was proof that the night hadn't won. Dawn slipped in quietly, almost unnoticed. No sun, just a pale wash of light bouncing off the snow and sneaking through the cracked window. I opened my eyes, stiff with cold, my hands shaking even before I tried to move. First thing, I checked Mark. Still breathing. That was enough reason to force myself up. The fire had gone out during the night. I gathered the leftover ash, broke apart the last intact piece of furniture I could find, and used the splinters to coax another flame to life. As the fire caught, I couldn't ignore the thought banging inside my skull: if I kept hiding in this cabin, we'd run out of wood and water by nightfall. I had to go out again. I layered on my clothes, shoved my cap over numb ears, pulled on stiff, icy gloves. I grabbed the knife and a makeshift walking stick. When I opened the door, the air slapped me in the face. The first step into the snow sent a sharp flash of pain up my legs, but I kept going. The world around the cabin was dead quiet, too quiet. The wind had stopped, leaving everything eerily still. I walked toward the small rise behind the cabin, the place where I had heard sounds the night before. No tracks. Just a perfect, unbroken blanket of snow. Then I saw it. A faint irregular pattern, half covered. It looked like the outline of an old boot print. I dropped to my knees and brushed away the snow. Beneath it, wood. Then a metal handle. I pulled. A small hatch opened in the ground. Inside, a narrow space, like a buried closet. A woodshed. The smell of dry wood and resin rushed out. Stacks of neatly piled logs waited there, sleeping beneath a layer of dust and cobwebs. For the first time since this nightmare began, I genuinely smiled. "We've got a chance," I said under my breath. Far away, a low rumble echoed through the valley. Maybe a distant avalanche. Maybe just the mountain shifting again. Either way, it was a reminder. I grabbed as many logs as I could carry and trudged back to the cabin. Each step felt like it mattered now. The cabin now smelled of smoke and damp wood. I wiped sweat and melting snow from my forehead, my hands shaking as I tried to keep the fire alive. I had wood now, but Mark's condition was getting worse. As soon as I brought the firewood in, his breathing changed, deeper, but uneven. I went to him and knelt. His skin was slick with sweat. His forehead burned under my palm. "Come on." "Not now," I murmured. I dipped a cloth into lukewarm water and laid it across his forehead, watching droplets slide down his neck. I tried to think logically, like I'd read in first aid manuals. No meds. No proper bandages. Just me, a knife, and scraps of fabric. I tore another strip from my sleeve and turned it into a fresh wrap for his ankle. I worked slowly, carefully, tying it just tight enough. The swelling had increased, his leg had taken on a bluish tone that made my stomach twist. His eyelids fluttered open. His pupils looked cloudy and distant. He stared past me, not quite seeing. "Lena," he whispered. "I'm here," I said. "I see. Light. In the water." A shiver ran through me. "Don't talk. Just rest. Save your strength." His voice faded again. I watched his face, fighting panic, forcing myself not to fall apart. Outside, the wind began to rise again. The sound changed, becoming deeper, almost rhythmic, like something breathing. I walked to the window and stared into the nothingness. No sky, no horizon. Just an endless white wall, swallowing everything. I went back to him, leaned in and said firmly, "Listen to me. You're not dying here. Not in this place. Not like this." He didn't answer. I rested my forehead against his and whispered, "If we go down, we go together. All the way." Then, far beneath all that snow, came a dull, heavy thud. The walls shook, dust fell from the beams. Was it another avalanche? Or the mountain reminding us where we were? Only the wind answered, carrying that slow, heavy exhale that now sounded suspiciously like a warning. Night again. But this time, I refused to drift. I stayed at the table, hunched over the radio like it was the last beating heart in this dead place. Wires spread out around me, batteries pulled from flashlights, bits of metal that had no business being part of a transmitter, but I had no other choice. A lone candle flickered, its flame struggling with every breath of wind sneaking through the cracks. Mark slept more calmly now, his fever slightly eased. That was the only comfort I had. I ran the antenna wire through the window and up, wrapped around whatever I could. I pressed a fork and a strip of aluminum together, trying to catch just a little more of the world beyond this mountain. If you ever worked, work now, I whispered. I pressed the button. Silence. Then a fizz of noise. Then nothing. My jaw clenched. I adjusted 2 wires again, sparks biting into my fingers. The radio squealed, then fell quiet. I changed the connection, using a hair clip to bridge 2 points. The radio crackled to life, louder this time. A deeper, more consistent hiss. And then I heard it again, 3 short, sharp beeps. Then nothing. I scribbled down the time, the pattern, every detail. My pulse was pounding so hard in my ears that I could barely hear anything else. Minutes passed. No repeat. I pressed transmit and shouted into the void. This is an emergency. Old wooden cabin, mountain ridge, 2 survivors. Do you copy? Silence. Just the low hum. I looked over my shoulder. Mark was still, but breathing. I went back to him, touched his hand. Someone is out there, I said quietly. They know we exist. That has to count for something. I sat beside him, held on, and looked back at the radio. The candle trembled and then died again. Darkness rushed in. The only thing left was the faint static, irregular, weak, but still there. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding and muttered. We're not ghosts. Not yet. Morning arrived in a dim wash of light, just enough to show me the frost clinging to the windows. I spread a torn, faded map across the table, something I had found stuffed in a broken cabinet. It was old, edges chewed up and fragile, but the bones of the mountains were still clear. In one corner, someone had written in red pencil, North Ridge Trail. I ran my finger along the marked line, following the trail as it disappeared into the blank, unmarked white. If we left the valley 3 days ago, I murmured, we must have covered at least 10 kilometers uphill. I tried to retrace our path, the trees we passed, the slope where Mark fell, the white wall of snow that swallowed us. The memories were blurred, like trying to remember a dream. I marked a few possible locations on the map, rough circles where I thought we could be. Off to one side, in my notebook, I wrote, possible position, between 2 streams, northward. Landmark, arch-shaped rock. I dug out a small compass from the bottom of the pack. The needle spun lazily before finally settling. North pointed toward a mass of white where the map might as well have ended. I pinned the map down with a fork and a knife, then marked 3 potential spots. One leads down to the valley, I whispered. One toward a wall of ice. The third. Unknown. Silence settled in the cabin. Vague, heavy, suffocating. I closed my eyes, trying to reconstruct the last clear memories, Mark's cry of pain, the sound of snow sliding, the sharp snap as we were knocked off balance. The world tumbling. Then nothing but white. One thing became crystal clear, moving blindly in this terrain wasn't bravery. It was suicide. I wrote in my notebook. Do not move until signal is confirmed. Survive. Light equals life. I folded the map, turned off the small lamp, and sat beside Mark again. I watched his chest rise and fall in slow rhythm and whispered, "We don't know exactly where we are. But I know where we're supposed to go, back. Somehow." Outside, the wind shifted again. Somewhere far away, muffled behind snow and rock, I could almost swear I heard those three short tones echoing again. The wind woke up slowly, starting as a whisper through the trees and then building into a roar that shook the mountain. I stood at the cabin door, wrapped in a blanket, watching as snow swirled into spirals and wiped out every trace of my earlier footsteps. We were almost out of wood again. The fire was more symbol than heat now. I looked at Mark. He lay still, breathing shallowly, his face calm but fragile. If I didn't bring in more wood, our precious warmth would disappear before nightfall. And without it, so would we. I pulled my hood tight, tied my sleeves, and stepped outside. The air sliced across my face. My legs sank into the snow, each step deeper and heavier than the last. By the time I reached the buried woodshed door, it was almost completely swallowed. I clawed at the snow with bare hands. My fingers went numb in seconds, but I kept digging until the handle appeared. Inside, darkness. But I knew where the logs were now. I grabbed as many as I could carry, 3, 4, maybe 5. As I turned back, the wind rose sharply and fog spilled over the ridge like a wave. The cabin vanished. My chest tightened. No, not now. Not now, I breathed. I spun around, searching for any landmark. Nothing. Just shifting gray and white. My heart pounded in my throat. Then I saw it, a faint flicker of light. Maybe from the fire, maybe just reflected snow. I headed that way, my legs buckling, wood slipping from my arms. I fell to my knees. One log rolled out of my grasp and vanished down a slope. I sucked in a shaky breath, shoved the remaining logs against my chest, and crawled. Meter by meter. Every muscle screamed, but I refused to stop. Somewhere below, a deep, menacing crack echoed, like ice giving way. I froze, staring toward the valley. The sound came again. Louder this time. Avalanche. I forced myself to my feet and stumbled forward as fast as my frozen legs allowed. Snow was breaking somewhere higher up, and I knew that if I was caught in it, the cabin and Mark would never see me again. I burst through the doorway, slammed the door behind me, and collapsed on the floor. The whole cabin trembled. The walls groaned. Dust rained from the ceiling. For several eternal seconds, the world shook. Then, stillness. I lay there shaking, staring at the ceiling beams. "We're still here," I whispered through clenched teeth. "We're still here." Outside, snow continued to fall, but now the mountain was strangely quiet, like it was holding its breath. The cabin was still standing. That was the good news. The bad news was everything else. It felt smaller now. The air thick with smoke, the walls sweating with moisture. Outside, silence. The storm had passed, but the quiet that followed felt heavier than the wind. I sat on the floor with my back against the wall. Next to me lay our last small pile of firewood, 7 logs. I counted them again. And again. As if the number might magically change. Mark slept, his face pale but calmer. The fever had passed, or at least retreated. One problem less. 100 still left. The notebook lay open on the table. On the page, I had written 3 words in shaky capital letters: stay, go, die. Underneath, I drew lines, trying to weigh options that didn't really feel like options at all. If I stay, I muttered, maybe they'll find us. If I go, maybe I never make it back. I looked out the window. The world seemed peaceful now, but it was a lie. Beneath that snow, the mountains still shifted. I packed the backpack with what little we had left, the last water bottle, the knife, the map, a pencil. Then I looked at Mark. He didn't move, but I heard him breathe. Maybe tomorrow, I said softly. Today we wait a little longer. I sat by the fire and wrote. Day 4. No food. Wood for one more day. If no help comes, I leave. I closed the notebook and stared at the radio. It had been silent for hours. In my mind, I could still hear the 3 short tones. They had turned into an obsession. If you're real, I whispered to nobody, send me a sign. Far off in the valley, thunder rolled, not loud, but firm. A reminder that the mountain was still alive. I exhaled and murmured, half smiling. Sign received. A few moments later, somewhere in the distance, I heard a faint metallic clink. Not wind. Not snow. Something hitting something else. It could have been anything. But to me, it felt like someone knocking back. The day was brutally clear. Cold, but bright. The sky above us no longer gray, but a pale glassy blue. The air held its breath. No wind. No snow. Just a stillness that felt like a pause before a decision. I stood outside the cabin, staring up at the ridge above us. If anyone was searching, they would only spot us if they saw smoke from higher ground. Mark was sleeping again, wrapped in every layer we had. Before leaving, I knelt beside him and placed a hand on his shoulder. I'll be back soon, I whispered. Whether he heard me or not didn't change the fact that I needed to say it. I slung my small backpack over my shoulders, matches, a metal pot, a few dry logs. The snow squeaked under my boots as I climbed. Every step dragged my breath out of me, but the thought of doing nothing was worse. At the top, the world opened up. The valley stretched beneath us like an endless sheet of white. In the distance, or maybe it was my imagination, I thought I saw a faint column of smoke rising from somewhere else. Another shelter? Another idiot stuck in this wilderness? Or just a trick of the light? If they can see me, maybe I can see them, I said under my breath. I started building the signal fire. Wood. Smaller branches. Bits of dry leaves I'd found under the cabin. I lit a match. The flame flared, then died. The second one did the same. Not now, I growled. On the third try, I added resin and pine needles. The flame caught, hesitated, then spread. Smoke began to rise, thin at first. Not enough. I dug into my backpack, pulled out scraps of newspaper and a torn piece of plastic. When the plastic started to melt and burn, the smoke turned thick and dark, coiling upward. I stepped back, watching it spiral into the sky. My heart hammered in my chest. They can see this, I whispered. They have to see this. Then I heard it. A low, distant sound. Could have been an engine. Could have been the wind changing direction. I turned my head, searching the empty sky. Nothing. I didn't let the fire die. I fed it more wood, more resin, more scraps. The smoke grew into a heavy gray banner. I pulled a strip of cloth from my pocket, tied it to a branch, and planted it in the snow like a tiny flag. Here we are, I said softly. Now do your part. The wind picked up, scattering part of the smoke, but some of it lingered in the air, dark and stubborn. A mark of life in all that white. The walk back to the cabin felt longer than the climb up. My legs were lead, my lungs burned, and my fingers had gone past pain, into a dull, distant numbness. When I finally pushed the door closed behind me, the wind stopped, but the cold stayed, lodged deep in my bones. Mark lay where I'd left him, his face as pale as the snow outside. I dropped the backpack and sat beside him, staring for a long time without saying anything. The half-light of the cabin wrapped around us, thick and heavy. I tried, I said quietly. I made smoke. A lot of it. Maybe someone saw it. Silence. I lowered my head, buried my face in my hands. My shoulders shook, and for the first time since this began, I let the tears come. They fell hot against my frozen palms. You know what the worst part is? I whispered. I don't even know who I am anymore. When I look in the mirror, I don't see me. I see someone who only exists to survive. I looked at him. His eyes were closed, but I thought I saw a flicker in his expression. Maybe my mind was just desperate for a response. I know you probably don't hear me, I went on, voice breaking, but I'm not leaving without you. I won't. I picked up the notebook and wrote. Day 5. Smoke visible. Still waiting. Still believing. I set it back on the table. Then I lay down beside him, reached for his hand, and just held it. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I just listened, to his breathing, to the faint crackle of the fire, to the distant moan of the wind. If we ever get out of here, I whispered, promise me one thing. That we come back one day. That we stand on this mountain and laugh at it. The fire in the hearth flared gently, as if answering. I closed my eyes. For the first time in days, I felt something that resembled peace, that strange calm that comes after surrender, but just before hope. Night didn't creep in this time. It slammed down. One moment there was pale light, the next, darkness pressing against the windows. The fire cast a soft orange glow over the room, shadows crawling across the walls, turning the cabin into something primitive, like a cave. I sat curled up on the floor, exhausted but far too wired to sleep. Outside, the world was silent, not empty, just waiting. Then I heard it. Not the wind. Not loose branches. A sound that didn't belong to the weather. The first faint crunch in the snow. I held my breath. Another step. Slower. Closer. Too close. My fingers closed around the knife automatically. I rose to my feet slowly, every movement measured. Mark slept behind me, breathing softly, unaware of the electricity in the air. Step by step, I moved toward the door. The crunching sound stopped. Silence. Only my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. The firelight flickered, shadows dancing on the ceiling. I glanced at the window. Something dark slid past. I stepped back so fast my heel hit the wood. Then came the hell. Closed this time. A sharp, piercing sound that cut through the cabin walls and into my bones. Wolves. I grabbed the old tin can I'd strung near the door as a makeshift alarm and gently rattled it. The metal clanged dully. Don't you dare come closer. I whispered, knowing full well they couldn't hear me, or didn't care. I looked back at the window. For a single heartbeat, I saw them, a pair of yellow eyes shining in the dark, reflecting the fire's glow. Then they vanished. I swallowed hard and stepped back to the hearth, throwing more wood into the fire. Flames rose higher, pushing warmth and smoke outward. Human scent, firelight, noise, everything that might keep predators away. Slowly, the sounds outside faded. The howls grew more distant. Then, nothing. I lowered the knife and sat down again. My knees shook. I didn't know if it was the cold, fear, or both. I glanced at Mark. Still asleep. Still breathing. You'll see, I whispered. Even the wolves don't get to take us. I stared into the flames. In their dancing reflections, I finally recognized the person staring back, not someone fragile, but someone who had run out of space for fear. The next morning arrived without color. Just a new layer of gray laid over everything. The first thing I did after checking Mark's breathing was reach for the radio. I switched it on, opened it up, checked every connection. Same wires. Same batteries. Same metal scraps. I put it back together and pushed the button. Nothing. Not even static. I sighed, rested my head against the table, feeling the weight of all these days settle on my shoulders. Then I heard it. A faint crackle. Barely there. My head snapped up. I adjusted the dial with frozen fingers. The sound grew sharper, like a voice trying to break through a wall of noise. Hello? I shouted. Hello? If you can hear me, old wooden cabin, mountain ridge, 2 survivors, we need help. Static. A thick wave of it. Then, words. Broken, distorted, but real. Repeat. Your location. Repeat. My heart leaped into my throat. Mountain ridge. I yelled. North side. Old cabin. 2 people, 1 injured. The signal cut out. The noise fell away. I sat frozen, my finger still on the button, as if force of will could drag the voice back. Nothing. Just the faint buzz of emptiness. Slowly, I slumped back into the chair, tears slipping down my cheeks, not from fear this time, but relief. They heard us, I whispered. Someone actually heard us. I grabbed the notebook and scribbled down everything, the time, what little I heard, the direction the radio seemed strongest. Then I ran to Mark, grabbed his hand, and squeezed it. Rescuers are coming, I said. Did you hear that? Just hold on a little longer. He didn't wake, but his fingers twitched around mine. That was enough. Outside, snow started to fall again. But this time, I stared out at the horizon with something that felt almost like a smile. The mountain was still dangerous. But now, it wasn't the whole world. The fire burned steadily, but I didn't let myself relax. Just because someone heard us didn't mean they would reach us in time. The weather could change. The signal could fade. The mountain could swallow them the way it had almost swallowed us. I needed a backup plan. On the table were notes, scribbles, little sketches, and pieces of rope. I stood in the center of the cabin and stared at the old wardrobe door. Then I grabbed the handle and yanked. The wood groaned but held. I took the knife and started cutting the hinges and edges, piece by piece, until the door finally broke free. Within minutes, I had 2 sturdy boards. I laid them on the floor, parallel, and started tying them together with the rope and fabric strips I had left. The knots were messy but tight. Board by board, knot by knot, it started to look like something. A stretcher. I looked over at Mark. There, I said. If they don't come, I'll drag you down myself. I went to him and checked his pulse again. Still there. Still steady. I tucked the blanket around him and pulled old gloves over his hands. Then I tested the stretcher, dragging it a short distance over the floor. It held. My arms trembled with exhaustion. My breath came in short bursts. But I had something tangible now. A plan that involved more than just waiting. Outside, a sound drifted through the walls, faint, hard to identify. Maybe wind. Maybe an engine. Maybe just my imagination turning hope into noise. I stepped out for a second. The sky was a blur of gray. Snow fell in small, steady flakes. No helicopters. No lights. I went back inside, sat next to Mark, and wrote in the notebook. Stretcher ready. If no contact by tomorrow, move toward the stream. Maybe there's signal lower down. I closed the notebook and looked at the dying embers. Tomorrow, I whispered. Or never. The fire popped, sending a tiny shower of sparks into the air. For now, at least, tomorrow still existed. The day was gray again, but the sky felt different, restless. Clouds moved faster, layering over each other. The air had that electric stillness I'd come to recognize as a warning sign. I stood outside the cabin, scanning the horizon. At first, there was nothing. Just white. Then, a sound. Deep. Heavy. Distant. Not wind. A slow, growing rumble that vibrated in my chest. No, I whispered. Please don't let this be in my head. I ran up the small rise behind the cabin, heart pounding. When I reached the top, I looked up. Through the heavy ceiling of cloud and snow, I saw it, a shadow sliding across the sky. A helicopter. My entire body lit up with adrenaline. I grabbed the mirror from my pocket, angled it toward the gray mass, and flicked the little flashlight I still had. I waved my arms and screamed from the bottom of my lungs, here. Down here. The sound grew louder, then shifted. The helicopter kept moving. The wind carried the sound away. The snow swallowed my voice. No. 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 I spun around and sprinted back down, almost falling, half sliding through the snow. I burst into the cabin, grabbed a burning log from the fireplace, and ran back outside, toward the old signal fire spot. I threw every piece of what I had onto the coals, then scraps of paper, the last bit of plastic, whatever would burn fast. Flames exploded upward. Smoke billowed, thick and dark. See me! I screamed, voice cracking. Look at me! Above, the noise of the rotors boomed across the sky. For a moment, it felt like the helicopter was turning. Then the sound began to fade. I dropped to my knees in the snow. My hands dug into the ice. Don't go, I choked. Please. Don't leave. The sound dissolved into the wind. Silence settled. Then, suddenly, the world held its breath. Everything went still. The wind stopped. The snow hung in the air like dust. And then, once more, louder now, the deep thumping of blades. I looked up. The clouds parted just enough for me to see it clearly this time, the helicopter circling back. I scrambled to my feet, grabbed a smoldering branch, and waved it wildly. Smoke poured around me, my eyes stung, my throat burned, but I didn't care. Here. We're here. The sound became deafening. The helicopter descended behind the ridgeline, snow exploding outward in white clouds. For the first time in what felt like years, hope didn't feel like a lie. The roar of the rotor blades ripped the air apart. Snow spun up from the ground in wild spirals, blinding and brilliant. Through the chaos of wind and light, I saw the helicopter sink toward the flattened patch of snow near the cabin. I stood back, my face lit up by the harsh glow of the searchlights. I was yelling something, I don't even know what, but the words were torn away instantly. When the skids finally hit the ground, 2 rescuers jumped out, bright orange suits, helmets, masks over their faces. They moved fast, practiced, cutting through the snow like it was nothing. Here! I shouted, pointing at the cabin. My voice was raw and shaky. "He's inside." They ran beside me. One of them briefly put a hand on my shoulder, steadying me, then followed as I threw the door open. Inside, the cabin looked smaller than ever. Smoke, old wood, and the faint glow of dying embers. Mark lay where I'd left him, wrapped in blankets, eyes half open in the sudden flood of light. "Lena," he croaked. "I'm here," I said, moving closer. "They're here too." We made it. The rescuers moved in, checking his leg, his vitals, speaking in quick, clipped phrases to each other. One of them adjusted the splint on his ankle, then started transferring him to their stretcher with a kind of efficiency that made my knees weak with relief. I watched, trembling, tears freezing at the corners of my eyes. One of them turned to me. "You're coming too," he said. It wasn't a question. We stepped back out into the storm of snow and light. The helicopter waited with its doors open, the interior glowing like something from another world. I turned for a second and looked at the cabin, the place that had been our prison and our shelter all at once. For a moment, it almost felt like it was watching us leave. Mark looked at me from the stretcher, his voice weak but clear enough. "We did it." I smiled, really smiled this time. "We didn't beat the mountain," I said. "It just decided to let us go." We climbed aboard the helicopter. The rotor wash slammed into us, the world turning into noise and motion. The rescuers secured Mark, put an oxygen mask on his face. I sat beside him and grabbed his hand. Through the small window, I watched as the cabin shrank, swallowed by snow and distance. Then the horizon broke, a pale, fragile strip of sunlight tearing through the clouds for the first time in days. I closed my eyes, feeling the warmth of that light even if it wasn't really touching my skin yet. "The cold is over," I whispered. As the helicopter rose higher, the mountains spread beneath us, white, vast, indifferent. Silent again. Somewhere down there, a small dark shape marked the spot where we had almost disappeared. But we hadn't. Not this time.